Right now, while you're reading this, something is happening in your yard. A cardinal is sitting in the same shrub it sat in yesterday. And the day before. And the day before that. It's not resting. It's not passing through. It's waiting. And what it's waiting for is you. Specifically you. Not your neighbor. Not a stranger walking past. You. Most people don't know this. Most people fill the feeder, go back inside, and assume that's where the transaction ends. But birds don't experience your yard as a vending machine. They experience it as a relationship. And that relationship has things they need from you that go far beyond what you're putting in the seed tray. Welcome to Yard Science. Today we're going through 8 things your backyard birds are waiting for you to do, things they depend on, things they track, and things that, when you stop doing them, change how they see your yard forever. Stay through the end. Because the last one isn't about what you put out for them. It's about what you've been giving them without knowing it, and what happens when it disappears. Number 1. Refill the feeder before the morning rush ends. Here's something most people never think about. Birds don't eat the same way throughout the day. They have a feeding window. And it's not flexible. Research from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology has documented that the most critical feeding window for backyard birds, particularly in fall and winter, is the first 90 minutes after sunrise. During that window, birds are in energy deficit. They've been burning calories all night just to keep their body temperature stable. By the time light appears, they need to eat. Immediately. Urgently. Without delay. If your feeder is empty when that window opens, they go somewhere else. And they remember that your feeder wasn't there when they needed it most. Chickadees, in particular, begin scouting feeding locations before dawn. They're making decisions about where to go while it's still dark. If your feeder has a track record of being empty in the morning, it gets quietly deprioritized in that pre-dawn planning. The fix is simple and takes 30 seconds. Fill the feeder in the evening, not the morning. Let the birds find it full when the window opens. Do this consistently for 2 weeks and watch what changes. Number 2. Keep the water moving. This one surprises people more than almost anything else, because most people think water is secondary. Seed is the main thing. Water is the bonus. But in multiple studies comparing yard attractiveness across seasons, fresh moving water consistently outperformed seed alone in drawing species variety. The reason comes down to feathers. A bird that can't bathe regularly loses the structural alignment of its plumage. Feathers work through an interlocking barb system, essentially tiny zippers running along each shaft. When that system degrades, the bird loses insulation efficiency and flight performance at the same time. A clean bath with moving water isn't a luxury for them. It's a maintenance station. And birds communicate the location of good maintenance stations to each other constantly. Cardinals are particularly responsive to the sound of moving water. In yards where a small dripper or wiggler was added to an existing bath, observers consistently reported a significant increase in cardinal visits within the first week. Not because cardinals suddenly appeared, they were already in the area. They just hadn't found the water worth visiting. Moving water catches light and makes sound. A static bath is invisible to a bird flying overhead at 50 feet. A bath with a dripper is audible and visible from several hundred feet. That's the difference between being on the map and being off it. Change the water every 2 to 3 days. A bath that's been sitting for 4 days isn't just unattractive. It's actively harmful. Bacteria and mosquito larvae make standing water a source of illness, and birds learn to avoid water sources where sick birds have been seen. Your reputation at the bath spreads the same way your reputation at the feeder does. Number 3. Create a landing zone they can trust. Watch where your birds go when they arrive at your yard but aren't ready to come to the feeder yet. There's almost always a staging area. A specific branch. A particular shrub. A spot between 12 and 20 feet from the feeder where they pause, scan, assess, and decide. That staging area is one of the most important structures in your yard, and most people don't know it exists. Research on bird approach behavior shows that the majority of feeder visits are preceded by a staging pause of somewhere between 10 seconds and 3 minutes. During that pause, the bird is running a threat calculation. It's asking, is anything wrong here? Has anything changed? Is the path from here to the feeder and back to cover clear enough? If your yard doesn't have good staging cover, a dense shrub, a low branch, a brush pile within reasonable distance of the feeder, birds will either approach with higher anxiety or stop visiting altogether. They're not being timid. They're being rational. A bird that rushes to a feeder in the open without checking is a bird that doesn't survive long. The best staging habitat is native shrubs with dense branching. Hawthorn, serviceberry, or native viburnums are ideal. If you have them, leave the lower branches. Don't prune them into neat shapes. The messiness is the point. The messiness is what makes your yard feel safe. Number 4. Go outside at the same time every day. This one is about you, not your yard setup. And it's something the research on bird cognition has made unmistakably clear. Birds track human schedules. Not in a vague, general way. In a specific, predictive way. Studies at the University of Cambridge and supported by observations at Cornell have documented what researchers call anticipatory behavior, birds repositioning themselves and adjusting their calls in advance of a known caretaker's arrival. In one long-term field study, crows near a suburban feeding site were found to anticipate a particular caretaker's arrival up to 12 minutes before she appeared. They'd shift their position in the yard. They'd change their vocalization pattern. They were waiting for her specifically, not just watching for any human to appear. Your backyard birds may not have the facial recognition capacity of a crow, but they have spatial memory and behavioral pattern recognition that is more sophisticated than most people imagine. If you go outside at the same time every morning, not always with seed, not always with anything, just to stand near the yard, to exist in the yard quietly, your birds begin to incorporate your presence into their daily model of how the world works. You become a reliable feature of the landscape. And reliable features of the landscape are safe. The cardinal that keeps appearing in the same shrub when you come out isn't showing off. It's expressing that it knows your schedule. And that it isn't afraid of it. Number 5. Stop cutting everything back so early. This is the one most people push back on because it runs against everything the culture has told us about how a yard should look. A clean, trimmed yard, no dead branches, no leaf litter, no brush piles, no seed heads standing through winter. That yard looks like care. It looks like effort. It looks, to a human eye, like pride of ownership. To a bird, it looks like a food desert. The leaf layer that you rake and dispose of in October contains an entire ecosystem of overwintering insects, larvae, and invertebrates. Robins, thrushes, and towhees depend on that layer almost entirely during the lean months. A yard where leaves are removed within days of falling has eliminated a food source that took months to develop. The standing seed heads from coneflowers, rudbeckia, and native grasses, the ones that look ragged and past their prime, are loaded with seeds that goldfinches, sparrows, and juncos return to week after week. Cutting them down in November, before the birds have had the chance to empty them, is the equivalent of throwing away a full pantry. Dead branches are prime foraging and excavation habitat for woodpeckers and nuthatches. A dead limb that looks like it should be removed is very often the most biologically active structure in your yard. Leave the messiness where it's safe to leave it. The birds are waiting for you to stop removing everything they've been quietly depending on. Number 6. Use the right seed for the birds that are actually there. Walk into any hardware store and you'll find a large bag labeled Wild Bird Mix near the entrance. It has a cardinal on it. Maybe a finch. It costs less than $12 for 20 pounds, and it looks like everything a bird could want. Here's what's inside most of those mixes: milo, red millet, and golden millet, seeds that the majority of birds you actually want in your yard won't eat. They'll toss them onto the ground, peck through them looking for something better, and leave most of it to rot. The seed that works is specific. Black oil sunflower seed is eaten by more North American backyard species than any other single seed. Cardinals, chickadees, nuthatches, blue jays, finches, and grosbeaks all take it readily. It has a thin shell, high fat content, and a caloric profile that matters for birds managing winter energy budgets. Niger seed, sometimes called thistle, is the primary driver for goldfinches and pine siskins. It requires a specific feeder with small ports, but if you want goldfinches to stay rather than pass through, this is what keeps them. Suet, rendered beef fat with or without added seeds or insects, is what woodpeckers, nuthatches, and brown creepers are waiting for. In cold weather, suet can mean the difference between a woodpecker that visits your yard all winter and one that doesn't come back after November. The mixes that work are simple. Black oil sunflower in a standard hopper feeder. Niger in a dedicated thistle feeder. Suet in a cage feeder near a tree. Those three, consistently stocked, will cover the needs of the majority of species that want to be in your yard. Number 7. Reduce the unpredictability. Birds are extraordinarily good at habituating to routine. They adapt to predictable noise, predictable traffic, predictable activity. They can learn to eat at a feeder while a lawnmower runs 2 properties over. They can ignore a dog that never chases them. They can stay calm through children's voices if the pattern is consistent. What they cannot adapt to is unpredictability. Sudden movement near the feeder. A door slamming unexpectedly. A cat that appears sometimes but not always. That's the worst scenario, because unpredictable threat is more stressful than constant threat. They can plan around constant threat. They cannot plan around random. In studies on urban bird stress physiology, birds in high unpredictability environments showed elevated baseline levels of corticosterone, the avian equivalent of a chronic stress hormone. Over time, birds in those environments either shifted their feeding time to avoid peak human activity or stopped using those yards entirely. This doesn't mean your yard needs to be silent. It means your yard needs to be consistent. Same schedule. Same routines. Slow movement near the feeder when you do go out. Give them 30 undisturbed minutes in the early morning, the feeding window, and you'll be giving them something that very few yards in your neighborhood actually provide. A yard that feels predictable feels safe. And a yard that feels safe gets chosen, over and over, by birds who have options. Number 8. This is the one I want you to sit with. You have been showing up for these birds in a way you may not have fully understood. Every morning you refilled that feeder, every time you changed that water, every time you went out quietly and moved slowly and let them stay, you were building something. You were building a reputation. And not just with one bird. Research on bird social networks, particularly the work done tracking communication between individuals in local populations, has shown that information about specific yards and specific people spreads. Birds who have never been to your yard can arrive already biased toward it because a bird they flock with, a bird they roost near, has signaled that it's worth investigating. Your reputation in your yard is not held by one bird. It is distributed across a network of animals who communicate with each other in ways we are only beginning to map. And here's what that means for the other direction. If you stop. If the feeder runs empty for a few weeks. If the water goes stagnant. If the yard gets loud and unpredictable for a season. The information about that spreads too. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just quietly, visit by visit, until one morning you look out and realize it's been several days since you saw the cardinal that used to come every morning like clockwork. You didn't just lose a feeder customer. You lost a relationship that was built over months. And relationships, once they erode, take longer to rebuild than they took to establish in the first place. The birds in your yard are waiting for you to do these things, not as a favor, but because they have made a choice about where they live, where they feed, where they feel safe, and that choice involved you. The mourning dove that sits in the same spot on your fence every afternoon. The chickadee that comes in last, but stays the longest. The cardinal that watches you from 12 feet away without flying off. These aren't random. These are animals that have decided, over dozens of individual observations, that you are reliable. That your yard is worth it. That you can be trusted with their presence. Don't disappoint them. If any of these hit something, if you looked out the window while watching this and thought about a bird that's been showing up more than you realized, tell me about it in the comments. Which bird? Which habit? How long has it been coming? I want to hear about the specific ones. The ones you recognize. The ones that have become part of your morning. Those are the stories that make this worth making. I'll see you in the next one.